In movies, we imagine an artificial intelligence that's highly sophisticated, capable of replicating human emotion and memory.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
Or sabotaging a space mission.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Or even being our girlfriend.
I've never loved anyone the way I love you.
Me too. Now we know how.
But we're not quite there yet. Most of the AI we see right now can have kind of an uncanny valley effect. Seems legit at first glance, but there's something a little off. Someone's mouth moves weirdly in a video. Writing makes sense, but it's formulaic, full of generic adjectives, almost like a school essay. Some of the AI-generated content we see online might seem mostly harmless, mildly annoying, almost funny sometimes. But on a poorly regulated internet, AI is increasingly being used for darker purposes, spreading disinformation, scamming people out of money, and in Southern Oregon, passing itself off as a trusted local newspaper.
We are just outside Medford, Oregon, and we are on our way to visit the stated address of the Ashland Daily Tidings.
OPB managing news editor Ryan Hass and I are headed to check out a building that, according to the website dailytidings.com, houses the newsroom of a paper founded in 1876.
But I guess we're going to find out what they're doing in this building.
The funny thing is, the Ashland Daily Tidings shut down in January 2023, but the website is still churning out new articles nearly every day.
Crossing the train tracks.
All right. We arrive at a big Art Deco-style building, not in Ashland, but in nearby Medford. It's white, and dirt streaks the front steps. Ryan tries the door. It's almost noon on a Friday. Definitely business hours for a newspaper. But
the doors are locked. It's got, some quite large windows with shades drawn, and the lobby's dark.
Not exactly the bustling headquarters of a local news outlet that you'd expect.
What is going on? This is a zombie building.
And yet, it looks like a news outlet. It's covered with signs and window decals for a local TV channel, a Medford newspaper that's also now closed, the media company that used to own it, and, lo and behold, the Ashland Daily Tidings. And there it is, Rosebud Media Mail Tribune Ashland Tidings of a defunct media company.
So I guess they have not paid to have that removed from the door at this point.
This building is actually a good metaphor for what's happened to the newspaper's former website. It looks like a news outlet at first glance, but something's off. If the current website was legit, why did it send us to this clearly bogus address? Why did all the articles on it seem vaguely familiar? And if the people writing them aren't in this old building, where are they? Who are they? Ryan's been trying to find out, and what he uncovered surprised him. At the center of it all is AI, and the hope that Ashland readers who once relied on the Daily Tidings won't notice. From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Today, we're turning our show over to Ryan for the story of how AI slop invaded local journalism in Ashland, cheating Oregonians out of trustworthy news and information, and what it could tell us as real local journalism, already at risk of disappearing, fights for its life in Oregon's rural communities.
If you believe the internet, reporter Joe Minahane was awfully busy in his first month at the Ashland Daily Tidings. He skied the slopes of Mount Ashland and headed north on I-5 to eat at not one, but 15 restaurants in Roseburg. He then drove to Autzen Stadium in Eugene, Multnomah Falls in the Columbia River Gorge, and the Nescoin Ghost Forest on the Oregon coast. He even fit in a trip across the state to hike the Owyhee Canyonlands in Malheur County. And sure, traveling more than 1,200 miles to write 10 stories in your first month on the job might seem like a bit much, but who could argue with his output? Well, he could.
The bylines are just bizarre because they're on topics, A, of which I have no understanding, and B, I've been to Oregon once in my life for a very, very lovely holiday in Portland some 8 years ago with my wife, but I've never been to another part of the state, so I just don't know quite how it came to pass.
As you can probably tell from his accent, Minahane lives in the UK. He works as a freelance journalist for big outlets like The Times and The Guardian. He's a travel writer and an author, too. When I first contacted him for this story, I wanted to know if he had been writing for the Ashland Daily Tidings. He thought maybe I'd found an article he had written that was later syndicated for an American news website. But I asked him to look at the Daily Tidings site, and, well, he was shocked. The website listed Minahane as one of a team of 8 reporters supposedly cranking out densely reported stories every few days. And they weren't just covering local Ashland news. They dove into Oregon's fentanyl crisis, homelessness in Eugene, the food scene in Portland, basically anything that might draw the eyeballs of Oregonians. I'd soon find out that none of those reporters on this website were real, or at least who they claimed to be. The bylines on the articles were put there by scammers using artificial intelligence, and in some cases, stolen identities.
We all know AI is here and it's not going anywhere. And it's obviously only going to get better. But I think the journalist impersonation thing speaks to something a lot more terrifying.
I discovered Minahane and his fake Oregon travel stories almost by accident. In my job as managing editor at OPB, I occasionally see one of our reporter stories or photos being picked up by a smaller outlet without permission. That's when I get involved and ask whoever's behind it to knock it off, or to credit us. But this time was different. In the months before I talked to Minahane, multiple OPB reporters approached me to say that the Daily Tidings website was using their stories under different reporter names. In some cases, the website was publishing investigative reporting that closely tracked stories OPB had published only a day or two earlier, reporting that had taken months of work. It was obvious this wasn't original work by the Daily Tidings, and it was pretty insulting. I tried to reach out and ask them to stop, but there was no contact information for actual humans on the website, only a generic email address and one of those vague contact us website forms that, let's be honest, probably goes to a digital dustbin somewhere. I wasn't exactly surprised when whoever was behind the website didn't return my messages. I could have just moved on, but I had to know who was behind this and why were they stealing so much work. One by one, I began to look into the reporters listed on the Daily Tidings website. None of them had a big social media presence, which I found pretty unusual for journalists these days. 2 of them had posts suggesting they lived in South Africa. One of those accounts shared an oddly worded post on LinkedIn that praised artificial intelligence. 2 more writers were correspondents for the Daily Mail in London. 2 others had actually worked as reporters in Southern Oregon in the past. One had 0 online presence as a reporter besides the Daily Tidings website. It was weird. I reached out to all these reporters, and 3 of the writers eventually got back to me. They were real journalists and said they had no idea what was happening, just like Joe Minahane. What they did know is that they didn't work for this paper, and they didn't know what to do. Minahane was the first person I looked into who I was fairly sure had his identity stolen. When I looked up his name, I found a book he'd written available on Amazon and an Instagram account that seemed like it belonged to an actual person. But when I checked out his personal website, something seemed fishy. Turns out this business with the Daily Tidings wasn't his first run-in with online scammers.
Funny you mentioned this. I actually let a website of mine lapse earlier this year, and it's been squatted by someone writing AI stuff about me.
Not only that, but Minahane had recently quit a copywriting gig because the company decided to use AI and pay fewer human writers. First, artificial intelligence showed up in his real workplace. Then it made one up for him. After I reached out to Minahane and the other alleged Daily Tidings reporters, half of their names disappeared from the contributors page, including Minahane's. The bylines on their stories were replaced by other names. I did notice over the weekend that your name had been removed from this Oregon website. I mean,
interesting.
I guess my question is, what's it like to be fired so unceremoniously?
It's actually my second AI firing, so I've got used to it now. It's fine.
Minahane said he felt a bit helpless to stop whatever was happening with this AI takeover of his professional life.
What does that do for a reporter's reputation, for someone's ID to be taken and for it to be sullied like that? I think that has quite scary implications for probably the next, I'm going to say the next decade of journalism, but let's be honest, probably within the next 2 years. When a bot's going to be capable of producing really, really, really good copy pretty soon, I'd imagine.
You're probably wondering why someone would do this to a relatively obscure writer. Well, as with most things, the answer is money. See, whoever grabbed Minahane's personal site filled it with mundane prose praising his journalism skills and his ability to write essays. There were links embedded throughout the page. If you click them, you see ads offering to sell high school students essays for their homework. And a similar type of cash grab might be happening with the fake Daily Tidings site too. It hits readers with banners and pop-up videos from major ad-serving companies like Google, Yieldmo, and The Trade Desk. Whoever's operating the site gets a few bucks for each 1,000 appearances those ads make. And that would make this endless churn of stolen stories, hundreds of them a month, a possibly lucrative business. In other words, it's a scam for clicks. And it gets those clicks by tricking Southern Oregon readers who just want news about where they live. The issue is, it's working. After OPB's first story about this came out, I got an email from Jim Burns. He's a retired journalist and an educator who just moved to Ashland from Southern California a few months ago. He'd subscribed to the Daily Tidings email newsletter and noticed something off about it too. Needless to say, I'm deleting my email subscription, he wrote to me after reading my story. Driving up the hill to meet him at his home in Ashland, we saw why he had signed up. Oh, okay, look at this. Check this out. Right out the window, there are mailboxes for the Ashland Daily Tidings. Little green boxes below people's mailboxes for the newspaper to arrive at. And yeah, they look legit. They look like actual newspaper boxes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one of them. There was like three of them.
Three of them.
So like everyone on the street is getting.
Yes.
The
it looks like the paper to get. As a former journalist, naturally, Burns started to research news sources before he moved to Ashland.
We were trying to figure out the community, what do people do here, what's fun, and also what's happening. I mean, how's the budget doing? What's the situation with the police? I mean, this kind of thing.
He found the local digital news outlet Ashland.News, which he says was a great resource for learning about the city. Then, after he and his wife moved here, he saw the newspaper boxes.
And I thought I must have missed this news source because these very distinctive boxes are all over the place. And you see them, you never see anything in them, but you see them. So I thought, gee, I must be missing one of the critical sources here if you want to be informed.
That's when he signed up for the daily email newsletter on the website.
But fairly quickly, it became obvious to me that this was either all repeated news from other places or something about it just didn't seem right. And then when I read your story, it was just like getting hit over the head. I mean, because it was like I have been scammed by this. And I think for me, it's because of all the physical evidence of the former, legit newspaper.
Just like the outdated signs on that building in Medford, the row of Ashland Daily Tidings mailboxes on his street were vestiges of the trusted news source that once was. Ghosts that made the trick real. Here was a guy who spent his career in news, and even he was deceived.
My reaction was one of shock and anger, really, because I put so much time into being a newspaper advisor. I was an advisor on 5 different campuses, and because I had put so much time into that, seeing something that's just this obvious scam, but it's like you said, Ryan, it's you have to know what you're looking for because it's a very good fake. But, who wants to be scammed?
Burns worries about what happens when quality information gets harder for readers to find. He said things like the misuse of AI make it easier for disinformation to spread.
I think that the average person has a mortgage, has kids, has, debts, and is just scrambling to kind of keep on top of things. So you don't have a lot of time to be analyzing, poll results or whatever. So, for that person, I think it's going to be very tough to figure out what is real versus what is not real.
And that telling what's real and what isn't, it's getting harder at a time when real journalism in Southern Oregon, much like rural areas across the Northwest, is hurting.
The business model's broken.
That's Ashland journalist Bert Ettling.
The ad-based revenue stream that supported subsidized journalism for so long is gone. It's gone to Google and it's gone to Facebook predominantly. And, those tens of billions of dollars a year have been sucked out of the economy.
He's been in local news his whole career and has seen many people laid off during that time.
I've spent 32 years in community journalism, edited 3 community papers.
For years, Ettling was the editor at the Ashland Daily Tidings.
And did that for 5 years until I got caught up in the downsizing of the journalism industry in 2019.
It's a story you're probably familiar with all over the country. Large companies, some of them backed by big hedge funds, buy up local papers and then lay off journalists to save money. The amount of local news being made goes down, and sometimes the papers close altogether. In Jackson County, 2 of the oldest papers, the Medford Mail Tribune and the Ashland Daily Tidings, closed for good a couple years ago. That created the environment for scammers to swoop in and take advantage.
Coming up after a break, how the scam took hold and the mystery of who's behind it. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you're intrigued by what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll kick off your week with a new deep dive into something fascinating every Monday morning. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPBphoto, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on what Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about AI passing itself off as local Southern Oregon news and all the great human-made OPB reporting and storytelling that you hear on the show is possible because of the support of many thousands of OPB members. Support our real live journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show.
Despite the stickers on the door of that building in Medford, Rosebud Media shut down the Ashland Daily Tidings in 2023. Its website went inactive then too, creating an opportunity for the fake version to replace it. The current Daily Tidings website claims that it was acquired by Difference Media, LLC in 2021. Bert Ettling thought that could be a lead on who was behind the website.
It's got this D-Media thing, and I thought, well, maybe, it was salvaged out of the wreckage of Rosebud Media's closure, but it was a Delaware corporation, so you can't really find out much about it. And I kind of basically hit a dead end.
I looked into Difference Media too. Turns out they don't own any newspapers. It was founded by a father and son to promote Christian music. When I called them up and asked about the Daily Tidings, they had no idea what I was talking about. I also talked to Steve Saslow, the former owner of Rosebud Media. He said his lawyers looked into suing whoever's doing this because he still owns the copyrighted name for the Daily Tidings. The attorneys told him the scam was coming from outside the U.S., likely from China, and said finding whoever's behind it would be like, quote, pursuing a phantom. In the end, Saslow decided it wasn't worth the legal costs. So the website stays up, running its small-time ad business and fooling news consumers. I got a sense from the journalists I talked to that they also felt there wasn't much they could do. Joe Minahane, the British reporter who got hit with 2 different AI scams, told me,
I try to take it in my stride. I mean, I don't know how much control I have over these kinds of things.
He says he doesn't really know how to counter a faceless AI that's out there impersonating him.
I mean, my argument would be that you counter it through strong institutions and good regulation. But as we've seen, it's like pretty, those sort of places are pretty toothless now in the face of big tech.
I reached out to the companies running ads on this website. I figured they probably wouldn't want to be paying out money to a scam. I even sent Google an email documenting how I knew this was fraud. The company took its ads off specific pages on the website it viewed as violating Google's terms of service. But the main landing page of the Daily Tidings continued to serve ads from Google and other companies as of this recording. None of the other ad-serving companies I reached out to even responded to requests for comment. So maybe it makes sense why the journalists I talked to feel kind of helpless to stop this stuff. AI is still getting shoveled into Ashland's local news, even after everything I found out. It's bad info, and that worries Bert Ettling.
At what level does bad information in our information sphere become toxic to us? At what point does it so degrade and make the information stream so unpalatable that people just stop using it?
After he got laid off from the Daily Tidings, Ettling went on to found the digital nonprofit Ashland.News, the outlet Jim Birds reads today to learn about his city. Jen and I met Ettling at his office when we came to town.
We are in the office of Ashland News, and we're right here on Main Street in downtown Ashland, and it's a wonderful location.
After visiting the zombie newsroom of the Daily Tidings, this living, breathing one was a nice change of pace. There's a story about a local school board meeting in the works. A collection of vintage AP style guides sits on a little bookshelf.
From 1996. So 28 years. 28 years. This one was actually mine.
A framed newsroom motto hangs on the wall.
And here's the "Just Get It Right" sign.
And leaned up in the corner, picket signs with slogans like "Truth Matters," "No More News Desert," "In Our Community, Our News." Last summer, Ettling and his staff carried those signs in Ashland's 4th of July parade.
In looking for ways to make more people aware, audience building of Ashland News, I said, well, why don't we go be in the parade? So, people see us. We're not on the internet. We're there in real life. And so we just marched. We got T-shirts and a banner. We made signs.
The response they got from locals surprised him.
People that did know us along the way were very encouraging. They would shout. We heard people yelling out, "We love Ashland News," and that sort of thing. And it's like, wow, that's cool.
To Ettling, it was a sign that people who live in Ashland aren't ready to just give up on the idea that they deserve a well-run local news ecosystem with real people.
I think people should support the town paper, if you will, because it's good for the community. It's Arthur Miller said a good newspaper is a community talking to itself. And that's what we're trying to be. We're trying to be a community talking to each other, to be here and facilitate that conversation and listen as well as talk to people.
In some ways, I guess Southern Oregon is lucky. Unlike several counties in rural Oregon that have no news outlets at all, they have a local public radio station, Jefferson Public Radio, and Ashland.News, and another paper, the Rogue Valley Times. That was established after the Medford paper closed. Ettling is optimistic that people want quality local journalism. Joe Minahane shared that optimism too, even after having his identity stolen by scammers. He says he thinks people can tell the difference between real journalism and AI-generated content.
I actually do think that there is a large enough understanding of this among people who read good quality stuff that they know it can't be replicated. What beats a really well-written piece or a really well-thought-out piece of journalism? I think, demand for long-form writing and podcasts shows that there is a demand, that people want it, and that, people are actually, I think, willing to pay for it as well if you give them good quality stuff. Maybe I'm a little bit naive about that, but I try to, see the best in people.
I do think Minahane is being a bit naive, if I'm being honest. The number of working journalists in local news has declined a lot in the past 2 decades, and the few who remain are often overworked and underpaid. But I also don't think it's naive to want a better future for local journalism. The journalists I know are passionate about helping their communities have that conversation with themselves. Since my first story about the zombie daily tidings came out, the website has stopped stealing so much reporting. Now they're rewriting press releases and passing it off as journalism, though the contributors page is still filled with names of people that I can't be sure are real. I also got emails from several readers who said they're worried about artificial intelligence. They were upset that someone was scamming readers in Ashland, or said they had seen similar AI news websites pop up in their area and they weren't happy about it. Because they wanted local journalism, the real stuff. They were ready to subscribe to their local paper or become a member of their public radio station. And that gave me a bit of hope that journalism wouldn't be replaced entirely by an endless stream of AI slop one day. Because that can only happen if we let it happen. And some people, like Jim Burns, aren't willing to give up just yet.
A really legit news consumer would just go around and take the boxes down and put them someplace. So if any of the listeners want to join me taking down boxes, give me a shout.
That was OPB managing news editor Ryan Hass. You can read his story about the AI takeover of the Ashland Daily Tidings website at opb.org. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. And before we let you go, I want to take a quick moment to shout out one of our listeners who shared some kind words about our recent episode on Portland's history as a jazz city. Bob on Guitar wrote, "I just listened to the episode on jazz in Portland, and I have to say it has renewed my spirit. After moving cross-country to Portland in 1996, I reveled in getting to know my new home. The pandemic, however, was followed by a sense of loss for my city. This episode and my regular listening to Portland's jazz radio station are bringing me back. Thank you." Well, thank you so much, Bob on Guitar. I can definitely say that working on that episode renewed my spirit too. And I am so glad to hear that you've been enjoying listening to our friends over at CamHD Jazz Radio. For all you other jazz-curious folks out there, check out their live stream at camhd.org. I produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier, Mia Estrada, and Sage Van Wing. Ryan Hass and I did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you have a question for us, please reach out. Luckily, we are all real human beings, and we are always happy to hear from you. Just send us an email at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.